Hey, welcome back, parents. Do you or your kids struggle with anxiety? Because here's some good news if your answer was yes, you are not alone. It turns out the only people who don't struggle with anxiety are dead people. And we are alive and well, folks. So that's why I wanted to have an anxiety expert on our show today. So, welcome to the Families of Character show, Brittany Richmond.
Oh my goodness. So excited to be here.
So glad to have you. Guys, Brittany is a highly sought after, emotionally engaging teen mental health speaker, and she's one of the few active women in the youth market. I met her in person at the podcast conference in DC this year, and I am telling you, she is lighting up stages with her passion in this space of teen anxiety. She's spoken on prestigious youth leadership stages nationwide, delivering her empowering message, become an overcomer. Recently, she was honored with the 2024 Voice for Positive Change Award, and her debut book, Lies My Anxiety Has Told Me, became a bestseller. Congratulations, Brittany. That's so awesome.
Oh, yikes. So the whole time you're talking, I'm like, is she talking about me? Like,
Sure
I
am.
get so cringe when I hear people talk about me.
Oh, I love it. You've been a mental health counselor for over a decade, and now you speak around the country to teens and college students about anxiety. So tell me, would you say that our country, the United States of anxiety, the United States of America,
On brand.
is experiencing like this epidemic of teen mental illness, even like 3, 4 years post pandemic? Is that what you're finding out there?
So first of all, I want to go on record and say that anxiety in and of itself is a normal emotion and we absolutely should feel it. And so making that distinction for people is really important. So how I like to make that distinction is like, if you are running outside and you see a bear chasing you, you're probably going to run. Like that's like a healthy fight or flight response, right? But if you're going for a walk out in your neighborhood, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles from anywhere where a bear would be, but you're obsessing about a bear chasing you to the point where you don't even go outside, that's a problem, right? So like that's like a really nice distinction I can make for people and we don't have to get into like the DSM-5 definition of anxiety disorders and things like that, but if it interferes with your ability to do normal human things like go to the store, things like that. If it interferes with your ability to do those things long term, then there's probably an issue that you would need to seek professional help for. But to answer your question, there's a lot of research that suggests that it happened before, we did the lockdowns for a pandemic. There's been a direct correlation over the years of cell phone usage and anxiety and depression and suicide ideation and suicide among young people since they got those phones in their hands. There's been a direct correlation.
Mm.
I do think that there's other variables that play there also, but there has been a lot of research done that we consistently still see to trend up and to the right on all of those things with the correlation. That's not just in the United States, that's been worldwide, that's been studied. And we're seeing a higher increase in anxiety among young girls than we do young boys. We're seeing that as well. And I challenge everybody listening. There's this amazing book. I have it right here, actually. It's called The Anxious Generation by
Mm.
Jonathan Haidt. And he details out all of that research. And do I think that the lockdowns were a variable that contribute to that? Sure, absolutely, I do. I think that there is just this overwhelming sense of this in social psychology they call it like a need to belong. I think that young people just want so much to belong that like over COVID we saw that like socially they were engaging more on social media and things like that, and I think it just keeps trending to the right. So
Yes, you make a good point that not necessarily the pandemic, but the like the coming of the cell phone, right? And the ability to be on social media and to go from those face-to-face interactions to a distant relationship, but you feel connected, but it's a
Mhm.
different type of connection.
Yeah, and I also think like that, I often talk to my peers I went to school with. I'm 38, so I'm a little removed from like this younger generation, but not by much. Okay, not by much. But we all talk about how like we all struggled when we were young, right? We all struggled. I think that we just didn't talk about it as much. So I do think there's a shift in the data maybe because of that, but even with people reporting those things, it just there was a different type of ability for us to work on resilience and different ways we've communicated. And I think that because technology just advanced as fast as it did, we have yet to really learn how to appropriately communicate via technology versus in person. And I think that young people are just, I mean, the reality is that we created this world. So they're just living in a world that we created as, the older generation that moved this technology along. So my whole goal is how can we kind of like meet them where they're at, right? It's not going away. We're not going to be able to do, totally remove technology. So it's like, how can we meet them where they're at to support them in their mental and emotional health? So.
So needed. So needed. And I love that you're out on stages, like engaging huge groups of teenagers and college students, and that they're hearing from someone that has been there yourself and has learned to live with anxiety. So tell us a little bit about where your passion comes from personally. Like, why is this, specifically anxiety, your platform?
Yeah, so I think oftentimes I get labeled as a mental health speaker, and I guess you definitely put me in that category. But I always like to make the distinction that I actually specialize in anxiety, right? So that's just a portion of that. But that's because that's something I not only lived with and overcame, but I studied a lot when I was in counseling and psychology. I really focused on that. So, I mean, even when I was young and I remember seeing like speakers come to school and like all these things, I always just thought if somebody were to stand in front of me and tell me they understood how I was feeling or they got it, but they made it through to the other side, I think that would have made all the difference for me. I don't know if I would have been so receptive to taking action on certain things when I was younger, but I definitely think that, growing up in a world where I pretended to be somebody that I wasn't in order to fit in, and then you're wearing a mask all the time and then creating almost like this identity that isn't really you. And then you kind of, it's like a typical thing that we see all the time. It's like we just want to fit in, we want to be accepted, we want to be loved. So we do whatever it takes. And those particular actions that I took made me feel worse and really were detrimental to my mental and emotional health. I mean, to the point that in after high school, I was diagnosed with multiple anxiety disorders, including an impulse control disorder called trichotillomania. It's
Mm-hmm.
where you pull your hair out in response to anxiety. And I still live with those things today. I want to be absolutely, totally clear. But after high school, it really peaked in college because then you have more freedom. You're very much, just out there in the world. So the activities I engaged in were very much like in the moment, kind of made you feel better, like the
Yes.
dopamine release kind of deal. And I don't say that to freak any parents out or anything like that, but it's just to be real. Like sometimes like one of the best indicators of a mental or emotional health struggle is behavior changes that are very rapid, right?
Mm.
They're almost like completely out of character. And when they last a long time, it makes you go like, what is happening? Like what
Yes.
is happening? Someone's struggling here. So the more I did these things, the worse I felt. So I did more of them to create that kind of like,
Mm.
oh, I'm okay, like things are fine, So,
Yes.
but I mean, it all comes to a head, and I was a two-time college dropout because of this too. So I dropped out of college twice because of my anxiety. I just couldn't hack it. I just was in a place where it was just exceptionally terrible, and I it finally just comes to a point. I mean, I think everybody hits like a quote unquote rock bottom. And I don't know if that's like a certain day, time, or whatever, but you're faced with a moment where you're like, I've got two choices. I can either continue on this path, which is hard to do, self loathing, just comparing myself to everybody, like just constantly at war with my mind. Or I can do the work, I can get into counseling and therapy. And, for me, it was taking medication for a while and understanding, physical, get back into things that bring me joy, control the things I can control. That's work. And that's also hard to do. Right. So
Yes.
you're faced with hard paths. You just have to choose your hard. Which one do you want to lean into? And so that's one of the things I like to talk about too is, and I think that when young people hear that, I mean, there have been so much feedback I've gotten over the years, Jordan. And like one of the things I've heard multiple times is young people have said, no one has worded it the way I have felt other than Brittany. And I don't say that boastfully, but that's just because I know what it's like to be at
Yes.
war with my mind, you know? So that's kind of the high level view. So there you go.
Yes. Yes. You've been through it. You said a two-time college dropout. Like it was so hard. I could not hack school. I needed to pull back, do the work, and
Mhm.
come through on the other side. And that is so beautiful. It also makes me wonder, like, who was it, that offered you kind of a hand up, that said, like, Brittany, it's okay to leave college, or it's okay to go back home, or to do something different, or just to put life on pause and take care of your mental health? Was there a particular person in your life that gave you that permission? I imagine there was.
I don't recall, to be honest. I don't recall anybody really being there. And I don't mean that like my parents weren't or anybody wasn't, but we didn't talk about it. Like it just wasn't the thing. So I remember like the first time I dropped out of college, like I had my whole life I wanted to go to this. I wanted to be a director. I wanted to direct films. I wanted to make movies. My whole life. I even went to Toronto, Canada and took a class just because for a week. And my parents took me, very supportive. It was amazing and loved that class. Looking back, there were definitely anxious moments there, but I had applied to Columbia College in Chicago, which is arguably one of the best film schools in the country. And I'm from a small town of like 500 people, friends. So
I love it.
when you go to Chicago, okay, it's a little bit of a culture shock, but I remember I was so excited. I remember being on the campus tour, okay? Like you do campus tours for colleges, and like the dream schools, it was just like everything I wanted. I mean, the classrooms were little mini theaters. It was amazing.
Ah,
Amazing. And that was one of the absolute worst days of my life is that campus tour because is what started off amazing ended in a very public first anxiety attack. Like it just progressed all day long. I mean, physical changes, physiological changes, personality changes. I mean, and talking about it with my mom now, she's like, well, we didn't know. Like, we didn't know. I'm like, because I didn't say anything. So, like, how could they know? Okay.
sure.
So, but I remember, I had applied and not been accepted yet. And the last stop of this campus tour was we were at the admissions office, having those conversations about like, how are you going to pay for this? Like that conversation.
Right.
But I'm pretty sure I blacked out because I have no memory of being in that office other than when the admissions officer told us there'd been an update to my application. And he was like, do you want to know what it is? And I was just like in panic mode,
Oh,
like
yes, that's torture.
trying to keep it together from this day long of just like not understanding what's happening to my body. But he said, you've been accepted. Okay. So like this is like dream school. So you picture confetti from the ceiling, like so excited, like this is the best moment of my life. And it actually turned out to be the worst. When he said the word accepted, it's like it gave my body permission to go into full mental breakdown. And I just
Wow.
lost it. And I just, it was so concerning for everybody in the room. And it just was like, that like just like moment where you just cannot get it together. And my mom was like, what's wrong? What's wrong? Like, what's wrong? Because that's obviously not the reaction that you probably expect to have.
Sure.
And so I just looked at her and said, I'm just so happy. But that was not the truth. I just didn't know how
Oh.
else to do it. So I worked my whole life for this school and I went, for like a week and a half, and then I dropped out because I just couldn't take it. And like telling that story on stage in a much more like, and to hear these students go, like, because so many of them are working for that moment. But
Mm.
like, and it's like, this can all be taken away. And if I only would have just opened my mouth and talked about how I felt, it might have ended differently. So it makes me emotional because like I still go to Chicago today and I see Columbia and I'm always like, oh my God, like another life, like that's just crazy. But yeah, it's amazing the moments that anxiety I feel like took from me, but now I don't let it take anything from me. So
Mm. So many things going through my mind as you share that. And thank you for sharing like one of your most vulnerable moments, because that's hard. That's really hard to do in a public setting on a mic. I mean, it's a big deal. And so I feel honored that you did share that moment with us. I'm also thinking from your mom's point of view, like I've done that before. It's like your child has a reaction. And as a parent, I think our sort of intuition is, how can I help you? What
I
is
know.
this?
I know.
Right? And so you prompt your kid with like, what's going on?
I know.
But in that moment, it's like, what if they don't know what's going on? They're just, their heart is racing. They feel like they're going to throw up. They're about to black out. They're sweaty. They're like, uh-oh, I know this isn't what you all expected, but my body's taken over. And we're on the parent side going like, tell me what this is. How can I help you? Right? And so there's this pressure. I felt that when you told your story, like there's this pressure on your part of like, name this, hurry up and say what it is so we can all get through this. Or like we can, and I'm not saying that's what your mom was feeling. I guess I'm saying from my perspective, I
Right.
might be like, okay, we're in this public setting. You just learned you were accepted. We're all excited, feeling excited. This is your lifelong dream. And your body's having this opposite reaction, but then also not being able to help ourselves like, oops, now I just put you on the spot to like figure this all out. Right? So I can understand from your perspective as a teenager too that you're like, I'm happy. Like, is that the right thing that everybody's looking for? Oh, yep, it looks like it was, right?
Yeah.
Like I said, the word that you were all looking for, but
Uh-huh.
then inside you're like dying, you're like blowing up with all this internal stuff.
Yeah. I think that there are so many ways, like obviously hindsight is so 2020. And I think like if you're asking like how to create space for that moment is it's really just a matter of like there's so many ways, but oftentimes with teenagers they don't know how to describe it. So I ask them like to describe it in like pictures or describe it in like I try to tell people, you know how like when you're about to cry, you get that lump in your throat? Like that's how my whole upper body felt. Like something was just like trying to get out, like something's clawing. Like those are descriptive words that are really important. So it's like, how are you feeling? Describe how you're feeling. Like tell me
Mm,
how you're feeling. Like describe it.
mm-hmm.
Describe it in a picture. Like make it make sense for me. I mean, I would have definitely feel like I would have answered those questions, but I want to give so much grace to my mom and parents and things like that because at the end of the day, I know they're teenager. I know I was a teenager, but I could have said how I was feeling. There's so much ownership in what we go through even as young people, and there's so much power in that. So that's one of the things I try to encourage young people with is they can't read our minds. They're not going to understand how we feel. Let's stop putting that expectation on people because that
Mm,
stops us from talking. It stops us from talking to people because we're like, you're not going to understand. So what's the point? Or I don't know how I'm feeling, so I'm just not going to talk about it. It's like, no, like we're not going to accept that. That's a lie anxiety is trying to tell you because at the end of the day, Jordan, these things are meant to keep us in isolation because in isolation, they thrive. And what happens when we're in isolation is we do things like drop out of college or do these behaviors that are so out of character because we don't know what else to do. And we see this a lot with young people and it's partially not their fault. It's their neuro process, right? Like that part of their brain is not developed enough, not till you're in your early 20s to see big picture, right? So if you
yes.
can't see the big picture, then we need to like lay the foundation for that and work on that as a skill. So when we
Mm,
do have struggles, we can better articulate them. So if I can empower them with just tools on how to create space, hold space, and unburden themselves, because every single movie, TV show, pop culture, anything at all where someone was angsty, like stressed, and they talked about how they felt. Do you know how they felt afterwards? They were like, oh, I feel so much better.
ah, yes.
Exactly. So if I can show them what it feels like to take that weight off, like, oh my goodness, because we don't want to be crushed by it, right? So,
Mm. Yes, and in doing that, you're letting this out in a way that's healthy. It's not harmful to your body. You're not,
Right.
cutting yourself, pulling out your hair, doing, checking the locks 7 times. It's a way of saying like, cleanse me, like get out of there so that I have like a clean slate, right?
Yeah, and there I always lean into things that are healthy and that serve us. Like if the behavior you're engaging in does not move you forward mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, financially, personally, professionally, if it does not serve you, it is not something we need to be leaning into, right? So, I mean, because we could all think of things we could do that make us feel good in the moment, right? But
Sure.
chances are they're not going to serve you in the future. But yeah, so that's one of the things I like to challenge them with too, is identifying what those are. And as far as like the trichotillomania, the behaviors that we do to relieve pressure or stress, and those can range, right, from
Right.
a lot of different things. Like those are anxious symptoms. They're a product of the trigger. And I always like to challenge people with, like, if we can identify what the trigger is and we can work on that, then the symptom should alleviate in some capacity, right? It should be less. It should be something we don't want to engage in, or we can change that. But oftentimes we want to treat the symptom and not the trigger. So it's really about that ownership piece too. Like, we are responsible, because like what causes me anxiety, Jordan, may not cause someone else anxiety, and vice versa. So how can we cope with it the same if we experience it differently? So that ownership piece is really important. So
Huge. And I love that. I'm such a fan of getting to the root of the problem. Like, just stop throwing Xanax at it and
right.
doing these little, behaviors that just ease the moment for 5 minutes or even 30 seconds, and then find yourself back in it. But go to do the work you're talking
Mhm.
about. Like, and as parents, I think we can support our kids in doing the work, right? If we notice these symptoms in our kids and we notice them engaging in behaviors because they're desperate, they don't know the root of their anxiety, they aren't there yet, they just know that they've got to function, and so they're trying everything they can, and these behavioral ways of cutting or restricting food or whatever it is to try to control the symptom.
It's
But as
control.
parents, I think, yes, we can support and empower our kids to get in and do the work. Yeah, it sounds scary to get at the root of this and kind of unpack what's behind all this. But ultimately, it's the old dandelion, analogy. If you just go out and pluck the head off just grab all the little yellow flowers, you're going to have more yellow flowers. But if you get in there and dig the roots out, you got a nice green lawn. So I love your philosophy around this, treating anxiety in teens is like, let's figure out why you're having anxiety in the first place.
Yeah, and you said it perfectly. It's all about control. Like anxiety makes us feel out of control. So we want to gain control. So what's the best way to control is to engage in behaviors, whether they're healthy or not. Like the behaviors we engage in, we have control over that. We do it or we don't. And so, but really the ownership and accountability, like the self-ownership is control. And that's how I try to like frame it for young people is you're in so much more control than you realize, like identifying your own trigger and then advocating for yourself on how to live well and be well. Like nobody wants to live miserably. Like I refuse to accept that someone's like, this is just easier to be miserable. I don't think so. Like I just struggle with that. So like,
Yes.
let's not kid ourselves. Let's do the work and we'll be better off for it. And with that, also, I just want to say to the parents listening that it's not your fault. Okay. I think that there is my mom, like I can say this because she still carries a lot of guilt today. Like she'll be like, I didn't know what that was. My daughter has built this whole career on helping people. And she's always like, I was not a bad mom. She was not a bad mom. She was a great mom. She was a wonderful mom. At the end of the day, like my brain works differently. It just is what it is. And I'm grateful for her love and support in this process, but it's not your fault. I mean, there are so many things that you can do to support your children. And I do want to, I'm a huge advocate of counseling and therapy. And I know that still holds a stigma today, which blows my mind because we go to the doctor when we need a physical, we go to the doctor when we're sick. Like I like therapy when you don't need it. Let's be proactive rather than reactive. I mean, I told a panel recently that my husband and I have been in couples counseling, and everyone goes, and I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. Did you think that's because something was wrong? Because
Right.
actually it means we're doing well. Like it's like, but that's the mindset shift. It's like when we think about therapy and counseling, you're like, what's wrong with that person? Like they're
Yes.
clearly a hot mess express. It's like actually I can function because I go to therapy and counseling.
Yes.
So that's the challenge too, is to get young people to reframe their mindset. So
Yes, and to be willing to accept help, and that it's
yes.
not a sign that there's something personally weak about you, or that
Oh,
you get to wear this hat around that says I'm mentally ill. No, it's like
I know.
you live with anxiety, and that's what your book is about, right? Is like living with, like, this is a companion. This just happens to be something that, rides along in my car with me, and I can navigate it if I can name it, right?
Yeah, that's a huge therapeutic technique too, is naming it. I think that's because you want to disassociate from it. You don't want to take it on as an identity, right? Like, I mean, obviously when people think of Brittany Richmond, they think of anxiety, which is fine. Like, I'm fine with that. But for the record, I don't take it on as an identity. It's a part of me, okay, but it's not all of me. I want to be very
Yes.
clear. So, yeah.
Yes, and I appreciate you just couching it in that way, because if I hear people say, like, I'm diabetic. No, you're actually Brittany, and you live with diabetes, right? Like,
Exactly. Exactly.
right, right. This is part of what you live with, and just like I said at the beginning, all of us struggle with anxiety. The only ones that don't are dead.
Hmm.
Right? We have anxiety for so many different reasons. Sometimes anxiety is there to motivate us a little bit. It's like
Yeah.
adrenaline, but we can tell ourselves this is a bad thing. If I start feeling shortness of breath or a little bit of, butterflies in my stomach, then I can interpret that and tell myself in my brain that, oh no, this is bad. And then all of a sudden it perpetuates this anxiety into a panic, right? And
Hmm.
so one of the things I've learned from a coach I've worked with, Andy Hickman, with Heal, HEL is his organization, is he talks about how, if we've got lots of things on our mind, it's swirling around in our brain, we need to dump it from our brain, right? We need to get it out in front of us, write it down, name it to tame it kind of thing, where it's not something that's just this overwhelm in your mind, but this anxiety is telling you, like, there's something that you are approaching that you just either A, haven't dealt with before. Columbia College.
Yeah.
Hello. This is a
Exactly.
big deal. I've never gone to Columbia College before. Oh, this is what this is. This is a brand new big place, and I've never been accepted to a prestigious school before. So my body's having a response to something that's new and different. And so I think as parents is if we can help our kids understand their body's signals and give them a range of what that could mean. It could mean this is new. It could mean this is different. It could mean this is something to run from. It could mean that, oh, you're sensing something off about someone that is actually really good information to know that this isn't a relationship you should be in.
Hmm.
Right. So I love that you're saying, talk about it, teens.
Yeah.
Tell your parents, put words to it so that they can help you and you can help, like, sort through what is this, right?
Yeah, and it's not just something I tell them. I actually have them do this in person. I mean, when I get up and speak in front of teenagers, the first 20 minutes, the whole introduction is just this talk exercise between them and their peers. They don't know what I'm doing yet until the end, but I get them, and it's just it's very simple. I really just want to show them how simple it is to unburden yourself, because uh, the reality is in a keynote and a breakout session, whatever, is I'm not going to necessarily change their entire life in that moment, but I am going to transform this part of creating space and holding space for other people and get them to feel that in the moment. And then if they can take that out into the world and just test it and just work on it, then as they grow, they're going to be able to test and grow in other ways. They're going to have those skills, or that moment where they're like, listen, I talked to somebody about this before and I felt better. So I'm going to keep doing it. And maybe they'll keep doing it. And that's what you hope for in those moments is just that. In fact, there was a student I spoke in front of a couple years ago. I still get DMs all the time and emails from students, particularly with the talk exercise they'll challenge me with and be like, or they'll say, I utilize this with, my friends. And it's amazing to hear. But she's going through a very difficult time. She's actually a student that doesn't struggle with anxiety. And she was a leader, all the things. But a lot of things have happened in her life recently within the last like 6 months, like back to back major life traumatic events. And she's messaging me saying, and now I'm obsessing over certain things. I can't stop. My brain won't stop. And then she followed it up with, I'm going to counseling because I feel like I'm strong enough to do that. And I just praised her in that moment and affirmed her, because I was like, the fact that you're so self-aware in this moment that this is an issue, or it could become an issue, and you're like, I'm just going to nip this in the bud right now. Awesome. And I'm not saying she wouldn't have if we never would have met, but that's the kind of relationship I like to show. And because I know young people will follow me on social media, I know they'll connect with me. So I'm constantly talking about these things, but also, just to let everybody know, I'm also saying, for me, this was my solution. This doesn't mean it'll be your solution, but this is what transformed my life. And I put those things out there. And I think that's important for them to know, is to see someone who still lives with these things. There are still days that literally suck. There are days when I pull out lashes and I'm just like, but I have gotten to the point where it's like self-forgiveness is critical, and knowing that you have the skills to move forward from it is powerful.
Yes, yes. And I appreciate you just sharing that, hey, these behaviors still flare up for me,
Yes.
right? Because even as parents, we have these anxious moments. I was just at breakfast with a friend. I'm like, man, for the last 2 weeks, the devil has had a hold on me because I have been waking in the night and like pacing around my room like a caged lion. I felt like, and I just listed off all the things that were going on with me. She's like, no way. She's like, me too. So then we as adults, because we have 45 years of experience, watching these waves of anxiety come for us, we put words to it, and we're like, felt so much better after our conversation, because we're like, well, what is this from? Well, let's think about all the changes we've had in the last 3 weeks. Our kids are back to school. We have a totally different routine. This and this and this has happened. And so I love that, you know, something that I learned in my 30s, you're teaching to teens. You're
Yeah.
like, no, you can talk about it already. You don't have
Yeah.
to wait till you're a stressed out parent. Guys, get these skills now, right?
Yeah, and I agree. I agree completely. And I think like one of the things that I also want parents to know is, you may say something, but it's going to hit different when it comes from somebody else. Like that's like the parent 101. They could hear the same thing from me, but they're going to be like, well, Brittany said this. Brittany said da 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 da. But you'll be like, I have said that for literally years, but you're the parent. So it doesn't hit the same. Okay. But it does hit though. It's reassurance. And so I don't want parents to be frustrated. They're like, well, I keep doing these things. I keep saying these things. It's like, well, sometimes they need to hear it from somebody else. And I'm not saying me, I'm just saying it could be a book. It could be a YouTube video. It could be a connection. It could be church. It could be, but when you could hear the same thing 1,000 times, but one person is going to break through. And I think that that's really important. But the efforts are not, they do not fall short. They do not fall short at all. I just think I can understand the frustration as a parent. I'm not a parent myself, but obviously I'm a daughter. So I've seen and had these conversations with my parents. And I think that I want to encourage parents, because they can live with these things and still have a happy, thriving life. That is the truth. The power of and is real. It is not my child is suffering, my daughter, my son is suffering, but I want them to accomplish this. I want them to do things. There is no but. They can do both. Like it's just a matter of, they just got to get to that point where they feel acceptance in what they're living with, doing the work to move forward, and then they can still improve every single day and still have that. That's the point of living with it, because we don't cure these things. You can't cure anxiety. Anxiety is normal. All we can do is make sure that we're not experiencing it in situations that don't call for it. Like if we get an email we don't want to get, there's no reason you should obsess about it for weeks and weeks and weeks, like I've done before. There's no reason that you're working a job and you have to walk out and you have to quit or get fired because you can't stay there. Your physical symptoms are just too strong. These are things that it's like, ugh, there's an issue. We need to address this and see how we can do that. But Yeah, I just want to encourage parents, like, you're not alone. A lot of parents are trying to navigate living with this, but I also challenge parents to get a little bit vulnerable sometimes too. I think creating space, but also sharing some of your own experiences. I know there's boundaries. I don't believe in being friends as parents. Again, this is coming from a non-parent, but seeing a parent who's a friend versus a parent, right? But I do think that there's this nice little cross section that is really powerful. So,
Yes, I 100% agree. We are not your friend, but we are a safe place to land.
right.
Like, you can come to us with whatever, and we're not going to judge you and like cut you off and tell you you shouldn't be feeling anxious, right? Instead, say, you're experiencing this. There's something underneath this. It's not just the thing that you're talking about, but there's something underneath it, and I want to help you get there. And I think, from I've been a counselor for 20 years, and I think one of the biggest mistakes parents make is saying like, "Oh, I bet it's this. I bet it's that. I bet this thing happened." And that was, it's like, whoa, you're squeezing out any space for your child to just say, actually, it's this thing that happened last Friday that I wasn't going to tell you about, but since you peppered me so much, I'm like, you're way off, you know?
I know. I really lean, Jordan, I lean into, I know you know your background and my background, curious questions is a therapeutic technique, right? So just constantly
Yes.
asking questions. And I think that the talk exercise I do at the beginning, and one of the things I'm kind of known for with students is the 3 words, tell me more. And what it does and how I have them actually engage in that is, and I've had adults after sessions message me and be like, I've been doing this with my husband, but like it's changed the way we communicate. All it is 3 words. But what it does, what tell me more does, is create space. Okay. It creates space for them to openly share freely whatever they want. There's no, how are you? Oh, I'm fine. Door closed. You're not getting any more information out of them. But if they're like, how are you? Oh, I'm fine. Well, tell me more. And it's like, well, school was just really hard today. Well, tell me more. Like, and tell me more also trains the person who's listening to actively listen. You are not impulsively trying to give advice. I think that's a human condition where we're like, let me fix this, like we're
Yes.
just, let me fix it. And it's like, sometimes people don't want that, which is why they also don't talk, right? I don't need your advice. They're
Exactly.
not looking for advice. But again, if the whole goal is to unburden how we feel and like take that pressure off and to show that the power of talking to somebody is powerful, then let's just let them talk, but also show them that we care by actively listen. And that's why tell me more is so powerful. It's just 3 words, just repeated over and over and over. And at the end, I mean, again, these DMs I get all the time, sometimes the kids will be like, hashtag tell me more. And I'm like, it's stuck in your brain, which is so great. And I practice what I preach too, because after sessions, kids will come up and like talk to me. I'll be like, ooh, tell me more. And they'll start giggling because they're like, I
Yes.
knew you were going to say that. And it's like, well, and sometimes it's hard for them. They're like, I don't know what else to say. And I'm like, well, that's good. Reflect on that. Like, that's really good
Yes.
information that you don't know what else to say. And so, yeah, I think it's really powerful. So,
Tell me more. 3 golden words, parents. This is your action step going forward. All you have to do is tell me more, and then don't be afraid of the pause.
no, exactly. Don't
Right?
just be like, I'm like just,
Yep. Just after you say it, give the silence some space, right? Like, if there's enough silence, someone's going to break it. And if you don't, your child will. So it's a really great technique. Tell me more. And then eye contact, right? I had an episode with Joey Odom from RO, Go RO, and he was talking about how to prioritize our phones over our family. I said that totally wrong.
I
How to
was like,
prioritize
wow, okay.
how to prioritize our families over our phones. That was a Freudian slip. And one of the things he said is 6 most important words you could say is, let me put my phone down. So if you say that first and put your phone down, and then you say Brittany Richmond's tell me more, pause, you're going to get your kid to start talking. Right. And then I love your advice about like, paint me a picture, or have you had this same experience before? And if so, like, when was that and what was happening then? Oh, yeah, this is just like that time I almost threw up before the swimming meet. Remember that, mom, when I was blah, blah, blah? Okay, cool. Now I'm getting closer to your reality of what's going on with you. How can I help? I love this question. Do you want me to listen or do you want me to give advice? Just need you to listen. Okay, sip, right? Tell me more. I'm reflecting back what you're saying and I'm actively listening. Sometimes I've been in a situation, I don't know about you, Brittany, but like when the anxiety is so high that I'll look at my husband and be like, I need your help. I need you to tell me what to do right now because I'm literally paralyzed. And he's like, okay, how about go empty the dishwasher? Does that help? Yes, because it's like an active thing that I can
Mhm.
do. It's over and it's engaging my body to let my mind settle down. Cool. I need your advice. 90% of the time, I'm like, just listen, let me word vomit. Right?
Two things I picked up on that. Jordan was like, first of all, you were able to articulate like, I just need you to tell me what to do or give me something to do. Like, you know that about yourself. That is how it's going to alleviate how you're feeling in that moment. So that is powerful. And that's the type of stuff like young people, instead of just being in that angst all the time, it's like helping them kind of identify like what's the next step. Like, what do you need to take some of this pressure off, like
Yes.
some of those moments. And then just, I really want to just touch on I know it was just an example, but like, oh, you almost threw up before the swim meet. A lot of parents have those types of situations with their kids, whether it's before a test or even getting through the door at school. There's so much angst. And, it, I don't believe those are really the triggers. Like, that's why tell me more is so important. I often ask the like students, like, how many of you have a fear of failure? Everybody raises their hand. And I'm like, I guarantee you that it's not a fear of failure for a lot of you. Like, you really have to dig into, you associate it with that. But maybe we go, tell me more. It's like, well, my parents really want me to go to this school. I'm like, oh, tell me more. Well, they're putting we're going to dig down to actually what the issue is. Maybe not a fear of failure. Maybe it's a
Yes.
fear of letting my dad down or a fear of da da da. Like, there's something else at the root. So I'm always like, don't associate yourself with fearing failure. You're not afraid of failure. Failure is not a bad thing. Failure is a good thing. It's feedback. That means you're actually doing things. But let's try to get away from that. So like the swim meet thing. If your child has moments like that, it's like, well, tell me more. Maybe because it's probably not swimming. Swimming is probably something they enjoy. And now we're associating a negative emotion with something they enjoy. So we need to get to the root of like why they're getting sick before every swim meet. Is it I have too high expectations for myself? Or if I don't win, XYZ will happen. Is it a lie? Like, there's so many other things we can uncover. And I think that's why Tell Me More is so powerful, because it also gets them thinking, right? They've associated that, oh, every time I go swim, I get physically ill. But I love swimming. Okay, well, there's something else at play here. So,
I'm so glad you broke it down like that, like to dig deeper, right? Because I just had this conversation with someone just last week about their daughter. Like she was a competitive swimmer. She threw up every time. And so I bet it's confusing to the child too, because they're like, this does not make sense. Why am I throwing up before something I love? Like, and then that's like produces a shame where it's like, something's definitely wrong with me if I love something and I puke on it, you know? And so
yeah.
digging down. I love that to get specific. Where does this come from? It's more than that. And if we can name that, we can heal that so that we can feel back through it, right?
Yeah, because you don't want young people to abandon things they enjoy because they've associated negative emotion with it, right? Because then that leads to replacing those things that are healthy and serve us with things that aren't healthy and don't serve us, right? So, I mean, it could be an array of things, but that's why I think Tell Me More consistently is so powerful, because there's something else involved here. Like, I'm convinced that sure, sometimes it may just be that thing, but I just refuse to accept that. Like, I just refuse to accept it in the moment. And I'm like, there's something else going on here. We need to just like dive into. But yeah. So
I love it. And I there's been times I will say as a parent where I've tried tell me more and they're like, of course, because I'm a therapist, my kids are like,
you're
you're just a counselor. You're digging for something, mom. I'm like, because there is something there. Like, so they might give some pushback, but that doesn't mean you just let go.
no.
You might, right, have to adjust it a little bit. But I really truly want to know like a little bit more of what's behind this. Let's like try to solve this together,
Also,
right?
it doesn't have to be about them directly. Like maybe they say something like, oh, so and so's mad at so and so. Well, tell me more. This is an opportunity to exercise that skill, and it doesn't directly affect them. So they're more likely to, open up information. And I want to also let everybody know that consistency is key, right? I mean, you can appreciate this, Jordan. One counseling session, not going to do a whole lot, but counseling multiple times over time can be very beneficial. Just like going to the gym. I mean, there's one time is not going to make a difference, but consistency is key. So I really lean into young people too. Like you may start talking to somebody, your parents or somebody, anybody. And that first time or that second time, you probably are like, oh, this was worthless. Like, I don't feel any better. Like, da da da. It's like, I challenge you to keep doing it because
Mm-hmm.
that one time is probably not going to have the effect that you want. Or it might even have the backlash, or there might be an effect like that you were not expecting or wanting, but that just may not be the right person then. So do not stop talking. Like when we stop talking, we stop healing, period. So
Yes, mic drop on that. When we stop talking, we stop healing. We were not meant to suffer with anxiety. We were not meant to do this thing alone. Everybody's got it to some degree. It's on a continuum. So let's just make it okay and safe to chat about with our kids. And I appreciate what you said, Brittany, when you said, like, if you say, tell me more, and there's not anything more, they don't, open up right away. Keep laying that foundation for them to land the plane there. It's safe. This is a landing zone. This is safe. Next time I'm going to ask you, tell me more. You're going to hear it over and over and you're going to finally be like, okay, this is she's showing up for me. She's being consistent. She's here. She really means this. And
mm-hmm.
then they start opening up. So many times as parents we can just throw the baby out with the bathwater. We can be like, well, I tried that and it didn't work.
Right.
They actually just backfired. And it's like, dude, you didn't even give him a chance, right? Like, oh, now are you so embarrassed that you said, tell me more and your child didn't? So you're just going to be upset and take offense and then not do it anymore? No, our community is about the long game. We are going towards the end zone as a family together. We are about doing things and staying consistent with habits and behaviors and safe conversations that lead us to a closer relationship with our kids. So
Mhm.
you have brought the gold today. What else do you want to share with us? Is there something you feel like, wait, Jordan, I got to say this? Is there another thing or something that you've said on stage that has lit people up or, you know?
I think that I feel what's your last bit of well, there's this one thing that I really try to lean in with teenagers, and I want the parents to know this too, because I think it's powerful for them to hear, is that I think one of the reasons teenagers don't talk about how they feel is because in their mind they've been convinced that you as a parent won't understand. So what's the point? Like, you're not going to understand, mom or dad. Like, who hasn't heard that? I've even said that, right? Like,
Yes.
not going to understand. So what's the point? I really challenge teenagers with the idea that people do not have to understand how you feel in order to help you. Period. It is a lie. And I challenge them with like a lot of them, like, how many people here have ever broken a bone? Like, a lot of people, athletes, raise their hand, it's fine. But like, when you went to the doctor, did the doctor say, oh, hold on, I can't treat your broken arm. I got to go break my arm first so I can understand how it feels, and then I'll be able to help you. So I'll be right back. That does not happen. Like, they do not have to understand what a broken arm feels like in order to help your broken arm heal. The same thing is true of your mental and emotional health. In fact, why would you want them to know how you feel? It's not good sometimes. Like, I do not want that for people I care about. It is my job to articulate how I'm feeling. It's not their job to read my mind. So it's a relationship. It's a two-way road. We can't put those expectations. So maybe parents just reiterating to your teenager sometimes, maybe not when they're in the middle of the angst, maybe when they're feeling, emotionally normal at the moment, is just really reminding them that, hey, I don't have to understand, and I maybe don't understand, and that's okay. I'm still here to help. Doesn't mean I can't help you if I don't understand.
Yes.
Just reiterating that, because I want them to know that for the future too, is people do not have to understand how you feel in order to help you.
Yes. So good. I love the analogy of the broken arm.
It's so true though. Like, I mean,
It works.
it's like, no.
Yes. So, so good. So, a lot of times when I'm doing these interviews, what happens for me, the host, is there's some question that keeps coming up and keeps coming up in my mind. And then we're continuing to talk and I'm like trying to weigh like, do I ask it? Is that just something I'm curious about? I have this own little conversation going on. And I've got to bring this up because it's just been nonstop
Oh
popping
God,
up.
I'm afraid.
I know. It's not even really a question. It's just a conversation that I've been dying to have with another therapist. But it's like, okay, so your kid's anxious. They've got this issue. You're you're supportive. You're trying to help them. You don't understand. They're not getting their need met through you and getting well with their anxiety and having relief. So you decide to pick a counselor. Okay. I cannot tell you how many times in the last 6 months I have had parents in our community come to me, Jordan, who do you trust? Here's our experience in picking a counselor.
Mm.
The counselor, because of mental health laws, I think it's 13, maybe 11 in Colorado, where if you take your kid to a therapist, the parents aren't involved if you're over 11 or 13, and they cannot ask the therapist anything about your conversation or what you suggested or treatment or whatever. And these parents are coming to me with these nightmare stories.
Ugh.
Jordan, my 7-year-old son has horrible anxiety. All of a sudden, he started getting so angry. Took him to this therapist. I researched the therapist online, looked like a decent person, like great credentials, great school, blah, blah, blah. It turns out the therapist tells my 7-year-old that, listen, in order to get through this anger and anxiety, this is one technique that you can do that will help it. Masturbation. The parents like, what? No, like that's against every fiber of our being. Like what? And so now you're conditioning my kid to use this behavior that is like
Oh
acting it
no.
out, right?
Oh,
Like this happens, you know it because we're
no.
therapists and you run into the crazies out there, girl. So this is what like that's why I love to have people like you on the show because number one, we're like vetting you. Like, oh, yeah, she's a real deal. She's not going to tell your kids to do crazy stuff that like goes against their morality in order to manage their symptoms and then gives them a potential bigger problem later on down the road.
I'm so like, sometimes I like to think like things shock me, but like I'm not shocked, at the same time. I'm like, I'm not shocked, but I'm shocked. It's like one of those weird feelings, like one of those weird emotions. Wow. So
This is real.
I
So
believe that.
I guess my question is just like first of all, do you do counseling with teenagers and do you have a practice where you're serving teens like on an individual or group basis?
No, I no longer do any sort of counseling or therapy. So, and I like to make that clear that I'm not up here in the capacity. I mean, we have our degrees and all the things, but like I don't do one-on-one or group counseling. I have done some anxiety coaching, which is different than counseling, right? So there's been a little bit of that. But I do that kind of on like if people contact me about it kind of thing.
Like
But
case by case basis or
yeah, case
whatever.
it's not something I advertise and anything, but I want to encourage parents. Like, first of all, if that parent is listening, I'm so sorry that is something you've experienced. The whole profession of just psychology in general is kind of has this subjectiveness in it where, we learn so much, we recommend so many things. It's like, but I think that it's like any other relationship. Sometimes you're going to have to go through some not so great ones to find the best one. And again, I don't want it to discourage you or stop you. It's one of those things where it's like, well, that didn't work. Let's try again. And
Yes.
I personally really value like services, and I'm not affiliated with them at all, but I really like betterhelp.com. I love that, especially for young people, there's something so comforting about being in your comfort zone while you're being asked to talk. But there's such a vetting process with organizations like that. I mean, you can pick even down to like if you want it to be a faith-based counselor or a woman or even their age. Like it's wild the type of vetting you can do and that sort of thing. But so I know it's a little different than being in person, But it's, I do like the virtual aspect of different companies like that, because you can very much check those boxes up front and have a better opportunity of finding that. I mean, my counselor that I had for years, friends, she passed
Mm.
years ago, like maybe 8, or gosh, pre-COVID. Wow.
Oh,
I don't, the COVID years make everything blend, but I
totally.
saw her for years, like after high school. Like once I built that relationship, I was like, this is my person, like that.
Yes.
And but after her, there were years without it, because how do you build that relationship again? Like, it's essentially like any other doctor, you have a relationship. And but that's why I really liked BetterHelp, is I was easily able to go through a few and find the right one. But yeah, so I would
Yes.
just encourage parents to keep going. I'm so sorry that that's something you've experienced.
Yes. Right. Well, or they'll be like, oh, and then, we have these beliefs. And then we walked in and the person was like this, and these types of things were in their office. And that's totally like not our jam.
Right.
And so I love your advice. Like, don't be afraid. Like, this is any relationship. Your intuition tells you a lot.
Yes.
Pivot.
Yeah.
If you know it's not a thing, move on.
Break
Right?
up. It's
Check.
totally
Yes.
fine. Just break up, shake hands and be done, and then go
Yes.
try and find another one.
Exactly. And I like the idea that, don't be nervous about virtual therapy. Like a
No.
child in their own home, in their own room, in their own comfortable space, being asked some really vulnerable questions is really powerful. It allows them to unlock something, and it saves a drive, and, the time also. I did virtual therapy for 4 years, and it was I was scared of it at first. I was like, this is not going to be good. We're not going to have the same connection. And it turned out the opposite. I was really encouraged by that. So I'd say, yes, parents, don't be afraid of the virtual appointment. It's a
Mhm.
lot more convenient, safe, and comfortable for the kid. And then don't be afraid to ask, like, do you feel like this is a connection? Because if your kid's kind of like, I don't know either, then move on. The other thing I like that you were talking about, Brittany, with the tell me more, is if parents develop this habit of tell me more, and laying that solid foundation of trust for their kid, if they need a counselor, it's more likely that when the kid goes to counseling, they'll sign the release and say, yeah, I've been talking about this to my mom or dad for the last 3 years. I'd be happy for them to join in on our sessions, or at least have a 5 minute, you know, little meeting at the end. Boom, there you go. That helps.
I think so too. I'm actually encouraged by the fact that so many parents see counseling and therapy as a solution, because I think like I'm such a type A like control freak. So I picture myself as a parent like kind of helicoptery. I mean, I just do. I do it with my cat, okay? I can't imagine a tiny human and I'd be like, "I'm going to therapy with you." Those sorts of things. But I think it's great that these parents are, because it's something they're going to want later in life. I mean, and for kids too, and teenagers and young adults, I always try to say, even people that you admire, like I always pick out like, who's your favorite athlete or who's your favorite movie star? Like they not only have counselors and therapists, but they have acting professionals or personal trainers, because they want to be the best, right? And
Yeah.
how they're the best is because they're constantly pouring into themselves. So this is personal development and personal growth that should never stop, right? So it's just like
Yes.
going to the gym or eating well. I'm taking care of my mental health too. So if we can make it like this positive, like uplifting experience and like frame it and connect it, like I think it'd be really good for them.
Personal development. I love it. Brittany Richmond, how can people reach out if they want to book you, or like email their school tomorrow and be like, let's have her come speak to our high school? I already have a couple in mind. I'll email you about them. But how do people find you?
Well, first of all, I'd be honored, so grateful if anybody felt the need to reach out and do that, because the more teenagers that we can help is just the better, right? Just the more young people that we can help. But my website is super easy. It's brittanyrichmond.com. I mean, everything's on there. My book is on there, which is written for the teen and young adult, but adults read it. It's definitely something for adults as well. But yeah, how to find me, my email, Instagram, all the things. It's all there,
Yes.
friends.
Yes. So good. The Brittany Richmond on Instagram, over 10,000 followers.
Oh,
Okay. She's a big deal. My son has personally been positively influenced by you, Brittany. you guys have been in the speaking space together, and just like I love the passion for just taking your own experience and sharing that with other people for the good. So
Mhm.
all the links in the show notes to find Brittany Richmond. Thank you for blessing us with this conversation today.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, parents, send this episode to all parents in your circle. Anxiety is a real thing. I talked about the United States of anxiety because
So
guess what? It's not going away. It is one of those things. So just embrace the topic, make it something easy to talk about, share the episode with friends, and enjoy a close bonded relationship with your child because you're saying, tell me more. 3 words of gold. I'll catch you on another episode of the show real soon. Take care.